Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, whether you're joining me from the present or the future. Welcome back to another Future Fight Vanguard video. Today, we're going to be finishing up the last of the champions of the Asia Circuit deck profiles, or Future Fights. Today, we're going to be talking about the Granblue deck list. So, it is our zombies. For those of you who really like pirate zombies, that's what they are. For those of you who are new to Cardfight, that's what they are. If you played Yu-Gi-Oh, kind of like zombies always focus on resurrecting from the graveyard or your zone that's already where your units go where they die. So it's kind of like a resurrection deck. You focus a lot on the drop zone, and a lot of your cards have effects that, depending on how many cards are in your drop zone, usually like 10 or more or something like that, they gain some kind of effect, especially in this standard deck. But before we get into it, I'm going to mention a few things. First, be sure to check out my second channel, which is the Let's Plays Anime channel. It's been doing really well. A lot of you guys have already gone over from this channel to there, and you're subscribed to both, and you've been putting in really good energy and really good support, and I really appreciate that, so thank you guys for that. But yeah, the channel, the link to that is going to be in the description down below, and let's get right into today's deck. So, obviously no G-Zone because, you know, standard deck, V-Series. And then let's get right into the deck. So let's start off with saying that Granblue is a Protect clan. So obviously if you guys have been following my videos or you've been playing standard, you know that when you ride a grade 3 that has the Protect marker on it, you get the imaginary gift Protect, which means that you ride a grade 3 and you add a Protect marker to your hand, and a Protect marker acts as a Sentinel and a PG in your hand. So a lot of times it allows you to get an additional card to your hand that's just a PG every time you ride, which means that your grade 3s in your hand are not essentially dead as long as you can ride them every turn. But you do want to be careful with holding too many grade 3s in your hand, even if they have the Protect marker or not, because until they turn into a Protect marker, they are still a grade 3 they cannot be guarded with. So just keep that in mind. So starting off with our grade 3s, we have 4 King of Demonic Seas Basskirk. Basskirk has 2 Vanguard abilities. The first ability is a continuous ability that says during your turn, if your drop zone has 10 or more cards, then this unit gets plus 5,000 power and a critical. So this effect is really, really good because it allows you to actually damage deny your opponent, but also force them into a corner where they cannot take this card's attack after, you know, a bunch of times. They cannot take this attack more than, I'm pretty sure, once, because by the time you get to grade 3, they take it once, they're at like 4 or 5 damage, so most of the time for the rest of the game, they can't afford to take this again, or they die. And that actually stacks very well with the second Vanguard ability because it makes the power very high. So the second ability of Basskirk is when it's on the Vanguard circle, once per turn you can counterblast 1 and soul blast 1, and then you choose a card from your drop zone, call it a rearguard circle, and then this unit gets plus 5,000 power until the end of the turn for each grade of that unit. So ideally you want to call a grade 3. That's kind of like apparent by its skill. The more, the higher grade it has, the more power it gets. So if you call a grade 3, it will be getting 15k power. So the grade 3s that we usually want to call are Dragon Undead Skull Dragon and Violence Franger. So I'll talk about the scenarios where you want to call those and use those as well. So without a booster, if you use Basskirk to call a grade 3 and then you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, something that I like as well is that I wish that it wasn't Counterblast Soul Blast 1, but I do realize at the same time that if they did not add the Soul Blast to Basskirk, then the card that you pull out of the drop zone would be making your drop zone 1 less instead of evening out. So if you have 10 cards in your drop zone, you use Basskirk skill, Counterblast 1, you Soul Blast 1, you have 11 in your drop zone, and then you call 1 from your drop zone, you still have 10 in your drop zone. So I like that that evens out the effect. But as well, it makes skills harder to use, like Violence Franger, if you have to re-ride and then not use Basskirk's skill to resurrect it. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. So moving on to our next grade 3, we have Dragon Undead Skull Dragon. You pretty much never want to ride this card really on Vanguard Circle unless you have to. Like, obviously it's better to ride it than not if you don't have a grade 3, because it still does have the Protect marker gift, so you still do get the Protect marker from riding it. And then also it has a Vanguard skill, that's Vanguard Rearguard, that says during your turn, this unit gets plus 2,000 power for each card in your drop zone. But since it can do that on Rearguard Circle as well, we just really don't want to put it on Vanguard Circle. Like, it's a better Rearguard for sure. So some of its other abilities is it has a continuous ability from hand that says this unit cannot be normal called. So basically, when you see the chance to discard this card, definitely do it, because you want this card in your drop zone, not in your hand, because it can't be normal card called from hand. You want to always call it from your drop zone. It can be ridden, however, so do not confuse that with called with ride, because you can ride it as your grade 3. Don't let someone tell you. I've had, you know, reports of people telling me that you can't ride this card. You can ride this card, you just cannot call it to a rearguard circle or the guardian circle, because that does count as being called. So you just want to discard it, basically, if it's in your hand, if you have another grade 3. If you don't, keep it until you do, or ride it when you don't get another grade 3, and stay on it until you can ride another card like Baskerk or something, and then you can Soul Blast it out and resurrect it. So its other rearguard ability is at the end of the battle that it attacks, you retire it, so it doesn't stay on the board for long, which is a really balanced part of the skill, just because if this card attacks for super huge numbers, and if you were able to just like not pay anything to resurrect it, and then it just stays on the board, like, that's just really broken, and you would have to literally dedicate every turn to destroying Skull Dragon, or Skull Dragon would destroy you. Not to mention, this is a protect clan as well, so like they're a lot more defensive than other clans for sure. They can survive a lot more. Going on to our third grade 3 in the deck, we run 2 Witch Doctor of Decay Negro Breach. So I see that they brought back the Negro cards with the V series, which is pretty funny actually to me. But it has 2 abilities. The first one is a continuous Vanguard rearguard ability that says during your turn, if your drop zone has 10 or more cards, this unit gets plus 10,000 power. So it's very much so like Baskerk, except it can happen on the Vanguard and rearguard circle, and it also gets 10,000 instead of getting 5,000 in a crit like Baskerk does. So this can be useful because it's just 22k, like that can make really good numbers on other Protect or Excel decks. But against Force with a booster, like it can also make a really good number with your Force stuff as well, making like 30 or, you know, sometimes like 33, etc. Then the reason that we run 2 of these actually is because when it's in the drop zone, this is the real reason why we run it. If we don't happen to get a grade 3, it has a drop zone ability that says we mill a lot in this deck. So if we happen to like keep milling our grade 3s over and over and over and over and over, then we mill our grade 3s out, and then like let's say that you're put in a super unfortunate scenario where in the early game you're milling so much with like Ruin Shades and Romario and etc. You just mill out a majority of your grade 3s and you can't find grade 3 after that. Well, if you are if this card is in your drop zone, you can counterboss 2 during the main phase, call this card to the rearguard circle, and then if your Vanguard is grade 2 or greater and it was not placed during the turn, which means that it can't be the turn that you rode to grade 2, like you cannot go second and be like ride to grade 2, counterboss 2, call a Negro Breach, bam, it's on my Vanguard now, and now I'm grade 3 and you're grade 1. That would be broken, because you also get a protect marker when you ride this card. So it basically allows you to ride it and have a grade 3 Vanguard to be on. That will actually be useful because it'll be just swinging for 22 every single turn on Vanguard circle without a booster, which is really good. But yeah, that's the reason that we run it at 2. And then we run 1 Violence Franger at 1. This card is really a really good finisher, in my opinion. It does not have the protect give, so you don't ever want to ride it unless you have to get the grade 3, like you just ride it for the twin drive. But you really don't ever want to ride this card, in my opinion. Like, do not do it if you have another grade 3 in your hand. Even if I had Skull Dragon in my hand, I would ride Skull Dragon over Violence Franger. But Violence Franger, we run it at 1 because this is a deck where, you know, when your cards go to the drop zone, they're not necessarily dead forever. So we can get away with running 1-ofs and never see them and mill them out or discard them. And then later when we need it, bring it back from the drop zone. So that's part of the powerful part of this deck. So let's talk about its ability. Is during the main phase when it's on Vanguard or rearguard circle. Once per turn, you can Soul Blast a grade 3 card and discard any number of cards from your hand. This unit gets plus 5,000 until the end of the turn. And then during the battle that it attacked, your opponent cannot call Sentinels or cards with the same grade as the cards you discarded from guard circle. So let's say that your opponent's at 5 damage. You can call this card to the rearguard circle. You can Soul Blast a grade 3 in your soul, which means that you have to have reroad. So a lot of times I'll go Baskerk, re-ride Baskerk, use the skill, counterblast, Soul Blast a card that's not the grade 3, and then call a Violence Franger, and then use Violence Franger skill. Ideally with Violence Franger, you want to discard a 0, a 1, and a 2. which means that your opponent will not be able to guard at all, because 3s in V series cannot block. They don't have actual guard amounts. So this card prevents Sentinels, but it also prevents all the same cards with the same grade. So your opponent will not be able to call any of those, and the only thing that they can do is intercept. So if you make a bigger column than a 10k basically, so this card will get 5,000, so it'll be 17k, which means that to complete 23, all you need to do is have any single booster in your deck to basically finish them off. Not to mention if you check a crit or a draw or a heal or something like that when you attack with your Vanguard. So this card is very, very good as a finisher. If your opponent's at 5 damage, definitely do not sleep on this card. Moving on to our grade 2s, we have 4 Ruin Shade. This card is like a remake from back in the day. Has pretty much the same skill, but there are some things that are different, so let's go over it. So it has a Vanguard Rearguard skill that says when this card attacks a Vanguard, you can pay the cost, which is putting 2 cards from the top of your deck into the drop zone. So you mill 2, and this unit gets plus 4,000 power until the end of the battle. Then it has a different Rearguard skill that's continuous, and it says during your turn, if there are 10 or more cards in your drop zone, this unit gets plus 4,000 power. So when you're playing against a Force clan and they have a 13k base, this card is extra useful because it can hit Force things by itself. So you can, a lot of things in Granblue can fight Kagura well, because not only are you, when you're killing their units, it's not really affecting them because they can just bring it back, but they can, all the units that they have can actually hit 13k bases consistently, unlike the other Force clans where they have to do some things to, and like having 10 cards in your drop zone is not a real cost if you've ever played this deck, because you will get to 10 cards in your drop zone very quickly. So I would almost say by the first time you ride to grade 3, if you get the cards, and then if not, by the second turn that you're on grade 3, or when you re-ride, you will have 10 cards in your drop zone. So very, very good. Then we play 4 Captain Night Mist. Captain Night Mist skill is on the rearguard circle. When it's placed, you can counterboss 1 and call a grade 1 or less from your drop zone to the rearguard circle, and it's just free. Just adds it to the it very much so reminds me of some card that I'm thinking of, maybe like Negro Lazy in the Night Rose deck, but I know there's a different card that I'm thinking of that specifically counterboss 1 and calls itself a booster. But yes, when this card is placed, you can counterboss 1, call a grade 1 or less from your drop zone, and if you have 10 or more cards from your drop zone, you can call any grade. So if you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone in the late game, you can play this card to the field for counterboss 1 and literally resurrect like Violence Franger or Skull Dragon, which is like really, really good, because you don't have to waste the soul from Baskirk, so you don't have to resurrect with Baskirk. So you could just, you know, resurrect Violence Franger, and that could be the turn that you kill them because you were able to do that. So really good. Finishing up our grade 2s, we have 4 Commodore Blueblood. This card used to be the 10k vanilla for this deck, but now it is so much more, so let's talk about it. It has a continuous rearguard skill that says during your turn, if you have a Commodore Blueblood in your drop zone, this unit gets plus 4,000 power, so it can become a 13k base. Again, hitting Force for free. Just yet another card that can do that without a booster. And then its rearguard skill is when this card, when this attack hits a Vanguard, then you can retire this unit, draw 2 cards, and discard a card from your hand. So this card is really good at filtering out your hand and making you draw good defensive cards, but also getting rid of cards that you don't want in your hand as well. So Blueblood will retire itself, making way for the next Blueblood that you play to have its power boost. And then at the same time, you draw 2 cards. So let's say that you don't have a grade 3, or you do have a grade 3, but it's just Skull Dragon. So I can draw 2 cards. Hopefully I got like a Baskirk or something, and then I can discard that Skull Dragon. And that Skull Dragon is useless to me in my hand anyway. So it allows you to filter out your hand very well. So if I was playing against this deck, if you can, without minusing yourself too much, I would definitely block Commodore Blueblood. Very, very good card. So moving on to our grade 1s, we have 4 Dandy Guy Romario. Dandy Guy Romario has 2 abilities. First, a continuous rearguard ability that says if there are 10 or more cards in your drop zone, this unit gets plus 4,000 power. So again, just becomes a 12k base. It can hit Excel or protect Vanguards easily just by using its skill, but otherwise it's a 12k booster, which is something that should not be overlooked when you compare it with like Violence Franger or like Skull Dragon. Like Romario can become a very big booster. That's a big boy, literally. But he can become a very big booster, and if he's on the field and you're playing Kagura and there's nothing else of extreme value, you should definitely pop this card. But the other skill is useful when it's on the Vanguard circle, basically. So when you go to your grade 1 ride, you want to ideally ride Dandy Gyro Mario. The reason is because when you ride to grade 2, it has a skill that says when this card is rode upon, you can counterblast 1 and put a card from your hand into the soul, and then you can put the top 3 cards of your deck into the drop zone, so mill 3, and then you put a card from your drop zone into your hand. So a lot of times, I don't know why, but a lot of times I mill out a PG with this card's effect, and then I can just add that PG to my hand. That is so powerful. Or you can like mill out a Basskirk. You don't have a Basskirk in your hand, you can grab that. It just allows you to basically look at top, like it's the Granblue version of look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 to your hand. But instead of putting the other 2 back and shuffling, you put them into your drop zone because they're usually more useful there anyways. Moving on to our next grade 1, we have 4 Dancing Cutlass. It has an activation skill in the drop zone that says bind one of your other Dancing Cutlass from the drop zone and put the top card of your deck into the drop zone. And then you can call this card to Rearguard Circle and countercharge 1. So not only does it give you some countercharge potential, but it does call itself to give you a +1, random +1, because binding the other one, like you're not going to use it anyways. So binding the other one that's there, if you have 2 in your drop zone, is not really a big deal. But the countercharge is a big deal, and I do wish that this card was 7k instead of 6k. But at the end of the day, when you call it behind like a 12k attacker or a 13k attacker, it is hitting for 19, 18k columns, which are really good, which are like magic numbers basically on a Force Vanguard, which is still good. So then we have our next grade 1. We run 2 Evil Shade. So we don't want to run a lot of this card because its cost is kind of heavy, but it does provide a really good cost at the same time. So let's talk about it. Its activation Rearguard ability, which means during the main phase 1 per turn, you can choose to counterblast 1 and bind a card from your drop zone and call a card with the same name as the card that you bound from your drop zone to Rearguard Circle. So be careful when you do this, because ideally, when you usually call cards from your drop zone, you want to call cards like Skull Dragon, Violence Franger, Blueblood, but beware that when you're doing this, you are binding a copy of that card to call this card. So what that means is you're going to have to bind a Skull Dragon to call a Skull Dragon. So when it's bound, you don't have any ways to get bind cards back at this point. Like in the Granblue deck, you don't have any ways to get the bind cards back from your bind zone to your drop zone. So there's no way that this card actually, like, that card just gets rid of the card forever. So you definitely want to have turns where you have double Skull Dragon. So you don't really want to use Evil Shade to resurrect Skull Dragon. You can't resurrect Violence Franger because we only run 1. And then if you're doing it for Blueblood, most of the time you're only going to have 2 Bluebloods in your drop zone anyways. So if you're using it to call a Blueblood, then you won't be getting power from Blueblood because the other Blueblood will be bound, not in your drop zone. So be very careful when you use Evil Shade. Mostly only use it to like call boosters and unimportant stuff like that. Like if I have 2 Norman the Ghosties in there, best believe I will be calling 1, especially if I'm not at 10 in my drop zone yet, so that I can use Norman the Ghosty skill. Which leading into that, let's talk about Norman the Ghosty. So it has a Rearguard skill that's activation. It says retire this unit and put 2 cards from your deck into the drop zone, like basically mill the top 2, and then one of your other units gets plus 10,000 power. So when you have Norman the Ghosty and like a Ruin Shade and you're fighting Force, that's amazing because you can create a 13k column, boom. I mean a 23k column, boom, just like that, which is a really, really good number against Force decks and really puts them into a pressure spot sometimes, especially if you use it on like Skull Dragon, then you play a booster back. A lot of the times I just resurrect this card / use the skill when I'm not at 10 in the drop zone yet. So this card is very, very good for that. Our starter is Guiding Zombie, which is one of our old starters, our oldest starters in the game. Like actually looking at it is kind of nostalgic. For those of you who have played since the beginning of the game, you know. But it does have a new skill. Like most of the starters in V series, when you ride upon it, you draw a card, nothing more, nothing less. Just leaves a card in your soul to be soul blasted pretty much by Basskirk. But other than that, not really useful, draws you a card, not much to say about that. Our trigger lineup, we run 8 crit, 4 draw, and 4 heal. We run Night Spirit and Mortal Mimic, which are our 15k shield plus 10,000 plus critical new triggers that are crit triggers inside of V series. We do run Gush Gen, which is our Sentinel trigger. So it is our draw trigger that is also acting as a PG, which means that when we take a damage and it's this card, we lost the PG, sure, but we get to draw a card and get 10,000 power defensively. And then when it's on offense that we check this card, we're getting this card to our hand, and then we're also getting the card that we drew, which is automatic like fodder for a PG, should we not have enough cards in hand to do that. So I really like that they added this concept to the game. Then we have for Rick the Ghosty, another old remade card, but it's basically just been remade into our 20k shield heal trigger that is for the V series. So definitely want to hold those in your hand and hope that you don't mill them for matchups like Kagero and stuff like that, where you need to block Waterfall Dragon because that card is busted. And yeah, pretty much that's it. So let's get right into the games without further ado. So we're gonna load up Granblue 1. So it seems like game 1 we're playing against another Granblue user, which is pretty cool. He rides Evil Shade, I ride Evil Shade, I attack him. He rides Blueblood and attacks. Right now he doesn't have a Basskirk in his hand, and neither do I, so it's kind of like a race to find Basskirk. And neither of us rode Romario as well, because we didn't have it, so I do get to rush him a little more though, and I do drive check a Basskirk as well. So he does ride Skull Dragon, and then he attacks me for 36. He gets a draw trigger, putting the power on his rear guard, and then I take Blueblood because it's too big to block. Then I ride Basskirk, get a protect marker. I use a skill, counterboss Soul Blast, and I call Norman. I use Norman's skill to mill, and then I give 10k to something. I use the skill of Cutlass to call over that, and then I attack a Vanguard for 2 crit. He blocks it, of course, because he's at 3 damage. He would die if I check a crit. Then he draws Basskirk himself and re-ride. So this time I PG his Basskirk, and then I take his rear guard attack. So we use Basskirk's skill to make it 32. We attack. He protect markers it. We do get a heal trigger, so we're able to just attack with Skull Dragon for super big. He doesn't have another grade 3 to re-ride, which is unfortunate for him. He does attack our Vanguard. We guard for a 2 to pass. He puts the power on his rear guard, attacks, and then attacks, and we get a draw trigger drawing a card. I thought about re-riding, but I didn't really want to because I wanted Basskirk and Skull Dragon to be on the board. And then I played over my other card so that I could just be making a big column. And then we attack for 44. He PGs, like literally uses 3 PGs that turn to block all of our attacks. And then he calls his own board. He attacks for 40. I guard for a 2 to pass. He doesn't get it. And then he attacks for 35. I miscalculated, so I took that one at 6 damage healed, and then I PG'd the other rear guard. So since I 6 damage healed, I am the true Granblue player, of course. But I just play a board, and then he literally quits because he doesn't have the cards in his hand. Basskirk will be getting a crit, so he knew that he would not be able to survive that even if he did check a 6 damage heal. But yeah, so I obviously wouldn't have won that game, I guess, if I didn't get a 6 damage heal. But I guess at the same time, like, the game went very different ways in terms of advantage. Like, I wish that we just both had different cards. But moving on to game 2, we're playing against Aqua Force, actually, and it's super good for the Aqua Force player when they get to go first, and I hate it. So we're trying to guard their attacks at the same time as like staying up. So we attack with Ruin Shade using its mill skill, and then he blocks Blueblood. He attacks our rear guard with one of his Tidal Assaults, and then he attacks us twice with the other Tidal Assault, which is busted. Seems like he's running like a Naval Gazer version, which honestly seems way better from the Maelstrom version that I've played against. So we use the skill of Norman to give 10k to Blueblood because I really want Blueblood to hit, but he does PG Blueblood. So, and then he calls another freaking Naval Gazer, and I give 10,000 power to Vanguard, but it's honestly not enough. So I forgot that I basically took a damage and it was a crit trigger. So I thought that I would be able to avoid this Lazarus attack because it was 19. And I didn't read the skill because I haven't seen a lot of people run Lazarus. So I didn't read the skill, or I like briefly read it, and I was like, oh, second battle. So I thought just on the second battle he gets 3k, but it's actually second battle or more. So when he went to attack with Vanguard, I threw down a 10k to 1 to pass it, and then he didn't get it. And then I blocked this Navel Gazer with the remaining Protect gift that I had in my hand, and I discarded the Skull Dragon. And then when he attacked me with Lazarus, I was like, wow, 22 to 22, and I had to take it. So like I said, if you're playing against Aqua Force and they go first, it's obviously super good for them. Very similar to how if any Excel deck goes first, like it's good for them because they get to put pressure on you early before you get your defenses. And a lot of times a Protect clan or a Force clan only gets really, really good when they get to grade 3. I'll say that more so for Protect clans, but even Force, they get their defensive cards. And what I mean by defensive cards is if they're going first, they get to ride their 8K, then their 10K vanilla, then their 13K. So it's basically just like a lot of the times that shuts you out of the game as a Excel player that has multiple attacks and stuff like that. Because if you're playing against Royal Paladin or Kaguro as an Aqua Force player and they go first, they ride that 10K base and they're just going to look at you like, can you attack me? No? Okay, pass your turn. So it's just basically when they're on their 8K, you basically just want to be beating them up versus not. So then we have Game 3 of Granblue. We're actually playing against D-Police. So it seems like we played all 3 matchups that come out in this set, which is unusual because usually people are spamming one deck, but this is really good actually, so it shows you like how the matchups go. So we actually do have a Baskerk and stuff this game, which is also good. And then he uses Dayusha skill to give his Vanguard power. We get a draw trigger, we take the Vanguard, and it's 2 damage, but we do get a heal trigger. And then we ride Baskerk and call Blueblood and Romario. We use Ruin Shade skill to attack for 13, just like I said. Also forgot to mention that it's useful on attacking D-Police because they're also forced. But we do check a heal, which going into their next turn really helps us because we're able to just guard this attack and then take his Vanguard, so we take the 2 damage. And then he attacks with the rear guard that also has a crit, which is pretty annoying actually. I didn't realize that this card gains a critical as far as its power too. Like I only read the gain power part, which I was like, that's not that good. But he does take Baskerk and I get a crit, so he has to take that 3 damage. And he gets a he has a great Daikaiser in his hand, so he uses or Dayusha in his hand, so he uses the skill to recall it after his attack, and I'm like, wow, this is so busted. And so he attacks me for 40. I block that one. I have to take the Vanguard to see if I can survive or not. And then I take it and I PG the rear guard, and that ends up being that. So we pass over to my turn. I attack for 25, but obviously, like, even when he did the Dayusha or the Great Dayusha turn, like, he gets so much advantage from being able to do it, it's ridiculous. So I actually checked a crit, and he basically wanted to pass me because if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to guard this column. So he wanted to pass me. I put the effects, I actually put a rubs hand emoji, so I was like, one to pass. I thought he had a PG in his hand, so I was like, this is the chance, boys, and then we ripped the critical. So just like, you know, the way of Vanguard, all Vanguard, literally. So we ripped a critical on the second check, and we were able to bust through his guard, and we would have dealt him 3 damage, so he just didn't even bother taking the damage because he was just like, I'm not going to check 3 heals. But regardless, he wanted to pass me because if I would have put it on Negro Breach on the other rear guard circle, Negro Breach has 10k from its own skill. Romario would have been 12k, so we would have been attacking for 34, 44 with a crit. So either way, he could not guard it, and that was GG for him. But anyways, that has been the FutureFight Vanguard video for Granblue. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like the video. It helps a lot more than you guys think. Also lets me know what you guys are interested in the future. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and click the little bell button next to it to stay updated with our content for when it goes live. You can check the description down below to find our social medias like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to support the channel a little more than liking and subscribing, you can check out our Patreon and our merch store as well to support. Be sure to check out the second channel as well, which is Let's Plays Animes, if you guys like anime or video game content. And with that being said, this has been Josh from Cardfight Empire, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace, guys.